A distinguished professor of economics, Professor Charan Singh, is with us today. He has taught economics at Indian Institute of Management at Bangalore, Stanford University, Harvard University. He had been the chairman of Punjab Sindh Bank. He had been on the National Housing Board. He had also served in the International Monetary Fund and many other organizations. He has a rich experience of over 40 years in different organizations, including RBI. Today, we are going to have a discussion with him on wide-ranging economic topics such as the inclusive growth, the jobless growth, the V-shaped recovery, and so on and so forth. Professor Charan Singh, there is a talk about the inclusive growth. What are the salient features of inclusive growth in the country?
So this is a very important issue that has been discussed in recent times, something about inclusive growth. When we are all growing, who all are contributing and who are benefiting from that growth. In India, for a very long time, we had thought that we are nationalizing the banks. 1955 we nationalized State Bank of India, 1969 and 1980 we nationalized other set of banks. Our main purpose and objective of nationalizing these banks were having banking penetration in rural areas of the country. The basic purpose of all this activity was inclusive growth. Everybody contributes into the growth of the country and everybody benefits from the growth of the country. It should not just be an urban phenomena. It should not be a phenomena of the rich, not of the industrial people, but even of the rural areas and the agriculture workers. Unfortunately, we did not succeed. By 2011, only about 35% of Indians had a bank account. So they had their savings, they could not put it into the banking system. If their savings are not into the banking system cannot benefit. So therefore, in 2012, another study was conducted and it was found that even if you take all types of accounts, post office accounts, cooperative banks and commercial banks, still half of the population does not have a bank account. So the government introduced the Jan Dhan Yojana. When the Jan Dhan Yojana was introduced, we have made huge number of strides and now almost every household in the country has a bank account. That means they're contributing into the national saving of the country. The banks are intermediaries and conduit of getting money, and then banks also ensure that they get the right amount of interest. So the individual is not in a way dependent or enslaved to the money lender who can exploit the individual. In the meantime, microfinance institutions, self-help groups also made big way. To that extent, the big thing to observe is that almost every household in the country is now contributing into the banking system, is also benefiting from the banking system. In the meantime, the banking system has been consolidated. Banks have become larger. They have also now had lots of banking penetration through the business correspondents. So banks are able to lend money across the country to every individual and therefore growth process starts. So in a nutshell, I would say inclusive growth means that every segment of the society, everybody in the country is contributing to the growth process. And this growth process participation, the best way to look at and estimate and quantify it is the bank accounts in the banking system and who all are benefiting from the banking system. In an emerging country like India, our state where we are, it is the banking system which will play a very prominent role. In advanced countries, it's the stock market which plays a very prominent role. Now, other than these schemes that I just mentioned, during COVID, many things had gone wrong. And the government was providing support through various means. Mudra loans were there. And then loans were also done for headload workers and carts and rediwalas. They all benefited. So therefore, the fruits of the inclusive growth or laying the infrastructure which could lead to good inclusive growth started showing results in the post-COVID. We also did direct benefit transfers, large number of them. The government also introduced direct benefit transfers not only to people below the poverty line or whom they want to send, or the women, they also started sending to the farmers. So to that extent, one can say the inclusive growth infrastructure has started yielding results because the money is directly reaching the people. People are getting associated with the banking system, and therefore the growth process in the country is far more accountable and far more transparent.
You mentioned very important points: direct benefit transfer, Jan Dhan Yojana, and Mudra.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on these three, because they impact our economy and the people at large, and that's the perception of people. So kindly elaborate on these three aspects.
Sure. The Jan Dhan account is something very beautiful. As I mentioned, we nationalized the bank so that there's banking penetration in the rural areas. It didn't happen. So what did the government do? The government said, and this was announced from the ramparts of the Red Fort in 2014, the government said that I want every poor man in the country who's not having a bank account to start having a bank account. And they started getting a bank account card, which is a matter of pride for every Indian. They had never seen, like you and me are used to credit cards, and right the time when we pick up the job, we have a credit card with us. But these people do not have those benefits. So firstly, it gives them the self-esteem and confidence. Secondly, it gives them access to the banking system. For the first time, they saw a banker coming to their house, opening their account. They could see a balance in their account. Government was giving them direct benefit transfers for many things, and therefore the participation in country's growth started. Once that happened, once everybody had a bank account, the government then started thinking of Aadhaar seeding. So people started having Aadhaar cards. Once you have the Aadhaar card, you have a track record of yourself. You have a bank account and an Aadhaar card, and then they brought in the mobile telephone. So then the jam trinity started. With this jam trinity, you could reach anywhere. You could send messages to your people through a mobile phone. You could tell them how much is the balance in your account. So apart from just the self-esteem and participation in country's growth, people started getting information and the benefits of having a bank account. In a way, that was a very good inclusive thing. When it comes to Mudra loans, those are very exciting loans. Please remember that the bank is in the process, it's an intermediary in the process of giving money to the people. So far, whom will the money go to? Basically large industries, Tatas and Birlas. Through Mudra loans, what the government did is, it said, I'm going to start giving small amounts of loan. Now, this is something very important to understand. The small loans are given to people like artisans, weavers, and just imagine you give 20,000 rupees or 50,000 rupees to a potter. What will the potter do with it? With just this small amount, potter will create 3 to 5 employments. How? He will make the pottery because that's what he knows, but he needs somebody to mix the mud and the clay and arrange those things. He needs somebody to sell those things. So while he's doing the pottery, in just about 20,000 rupees of loan that you gave him, he creates 3 to 5 jobs. So this is the beauty of the Mudra loan. The Mudra loan is given at the lower end of the segment of the society, people who are very poor. The largest amount I think is 1 lakh. The lowest could be as low as 10,000. But you give this loan to that segment of the society which generally the bank would not give. So I would call it as an extension of the Jan Dhan account itself. So now you have created so much of jobs in the country. Now you are right. In a country like ours, while you need engineers to make satellites, you also have to provide jobs to the people so that they are engaged. And that's what I like in India. Like the Western world, we do not give unemployment allowances. We create jobs. And the meaning and the difference between creating a job and giving unemployment allowances, unemployment allowance basically ensures laziness. Whereas employment engages your mind and gives you employment and gives you a sense of self-esteem. How long can you give unemployment allowance when you are a poor country like India? And moreover, we have experimented in the past when money is given free of cost without any labor, and Gandhiji himself used to say, you can't give food or can't give money unless there is hard work involved in it. But if you experiment and give money without hard work, Indians would probably get into drugs. They have got into drugs. They would get into buying weapons, or local weapons, and Naxal movements are there. So one has to see that employment given to Indians, they're very smart, they're very brilliant, they're absolutely intelligent, and they're hardworking, but you give them an opportunity, they'll create an asset, their mind will be engaged, They'll be busy throughout the day and then they need a rest, so they're relaxed. The unsocial activities will not take place. So Mudra loan, to my mind, goes to that extent of financial inclusion, just not having money, but also opportunities that are created. So that is why I say these things which Indian policy makers have devised and have worked over the years, they are very, very objective and has to be considered, evaluated, and probably implemented in rest of the world. This brings down the crime rate, and it also engages an individual to do productive activity and contribute into national growth.
Yes, it is very interesting to have the linkages between the economic growth and social cohesion, and then law and order situation will be there. It's very, very important. But some authors, they have extensively written that our economic story is good, but this is a jobless growth. Is it really true that our growth is jobless? What's your take on this?
So I'll give you my personal take on this. On one hand, the country wants to compete with the best in the world. We want to be exporting satellites to the rest of the world. Our cloth, our transport, cars and trucks, they have to be the best and should be exportable quality. Now, when you do this, obviously lots of computerization will play a role. So there are large industries in our country where millions of rupees would be invested, but only computer engineers would be working. I have seen factories in Bombay run by Japanese technology, crores of rupees invested, but just 10 employees. Now, when you are competing with rest of the world to give a competitive export quality material, it is obvious that technology and computerization will play a very prominent role. On the other hand, India is the very young country, and huge demographic dividend is here. Right. People below 35 years, I think nearly 60 crore people below the age of 35. You have to keep them engaged and you have to employ them. To employ them and keep them engaged, as I just argued, you need to ensure that their mind is engaged somewhere. Otherwise, you're wasting that mind. And they're bright, brilliant Indians. They may not be very literate. They may not be educated in terms of the Western education system of BA or MA, but they are smart and they can find their way. In case you don't engage them productively, they will find their way probably on the wrong side too. So you have to make sure that you protect them from slipping into the other side. That is why these small loans play a very important role through the banking system. These small loans can be for various purposes. They can be for small activities. They can also be just buying a car, and providing taxi services, or buying a small cart and standing outside a tourist place and providing coconut water for people to drink. But if you look and if you say that India has had a jobless growth, probably that is the problem with statistics, not with the growth. I give you a live example. I live in Greater Noida. You don't find people on the street. You want them to come and do jobs, they are not available. Petty jobs, you want them to drive your car, there are hardly drivers available. You are looking for somebody to come and do the lawn for you, hardly any people available. Maids are not available. So people who argue that India has generally had a jobless growth, I simply say it's the statistics, which is not capturing the overall scene. The overall scene has been very balanced. On one hand, India is not just one country, it's a continent. It has countries which are much more stronger, and it has states which are equivalent to many countries in other parts of the world. India is like a continent. But in a continent like India, you have some rich and you have some poor. Similarly, when you provide job opportunities and you have exports, you have to compete with the best in the world, which are technologically sound, and those have to be financed in a way that there is less people employed, but they are all technologically solid people employed. On the other hand, you have to take care of people like in UP, in Bihar, in Jharkhand, where there's not very high literacy rate, where there's not many factories and industries which are at the high tech. Then you have to provide them jobs which are unskilled and which are mass in numbers. So I think at both spectrums, the country is doing well, and loans are tailored for both spectrums of work. So setting up small units, which is happening. Toy units are happening in UP. They have a new scheme, which is very good scheme for the MSMEs. MSMEs are labor intensive. The new scheme is that for every district they have identified a product. So the banks then know that this is the product for the industry, for the district, and banks start giving loans there. And many of these products are labor intensive and therefore engage people. So therefore I would not conclude by saying that the country is only heading for a jobless growth. I would say it is balanced. The statistics has to really look into how to capture this lower segment of the society and say that how they are engaged. Now I would like to conclude by saying that my interaction with people across during COVID and post-COVID and even before COVID, I found that unemployment per se is really not here. People are engaged. They may not be engaged in the type of job that they want. They are ambitious and would look for a better job. That is okay. But saying that there are people who are unemployed, I'm not very sure about it. The statistics which comes out about CMI also doesn't show that people are unemployed to a large extent.
Many economists argue that instead of seeking the job, you should be job provider rather than seeker. So how it is unfolding in our economy? Do you find any change in this thought process of seeking the job and then you change the paradigm from job seeker to job provider?
Yes, in a young demographic country like India, you cannot provide jobs to everybody. How many public sector jobs can be created? How many police officers can you create? How many civil administrators can you create? How many people would need to be absorbed in the army? How many would you engage in judiciary? Public sector has a limit. So to answer your question, we'll have to do a multiple approach. The first thing is we have to tell Indians they have to fend for themselves. They have to fend for themselves within the country. They have to fend for themselves outside the country. They need to pick up skills which are needed in our own country, in countries outside where they want to go. So therefore the educational institutions will also have to do something. They cannot continue with the traditional method of education they have done so far. When the demographic dividend was not so rich, they were educating people, training people to join public sector jobs. Now they have to start thinking of creating entrepreneurs. I have been arguing nearly for 5 years now, instead of Indian Institute of Management, where we were creating brilliant graduates for Goldman Sachs and JP Morgans to pick up. They would benefit by picking up the best minds in India, which are equivalent to the Western world, give them half or 1/10 of the salary what they would give to a Stanford educated and make profits. Why should we give people to them at such low cost? Rather, we need Indian Institute of Entrepreneurship. We need our Indian institutions to train entrepreneurs, make them learn how to take risk and make them socially cautious, make them environmentally cautious and put them into the system so that they don't exploit the Indian environment. So the Indian education system has to also change. Secondly, the private sector has to learn that the government is not going to only give jobs. They need to now start thinking, the private sector, that they have a role in our country. So far, the private sector was shunned. The so-called planners in 1950s, including Mahalanobis, everybody thought that the public sector should take the lead and provide jobs. The policymakers and the politicians also said the socialist pattern of society is most acceptable. Time has changed. Now, the socialist pattern of society took us to some level, but now the private sector has to take over. So the private sector has to be given the confidence that they will run shoulder to shoulder with the public sector, and that's why the government has started making schemes where public assets are being rented to them and said, come on, we have done this work, the basic infrastructure, the building is ready, now run it for us. So the private sector picks up the confidence they need to contribute into nation building. Similarly, private sector has now to be encouraged and said, private sector is no more a bad word. You are not evil. You are also contributing into the national income. Look, for long years, it was only the public sector banks in the country. After reform started in 1991, private sector banks got the licenses. They are doing very well. In the banking system, private sector is contributing very aggressively into banking, and the public sector still accounts for 70%, but the private sector accounts for 30%. Within 10-15 years they've done this. Similarly, in the country, the private sector has to come up, pick up the confidence, start contributing into national building. The government in its way and policymakers and politicians have to stop calling them evil have to stop calling them exploiters, have to start seeing benefits in the private sector. The rest of the world where we dream to be like America or Europe, private sector contributes a very significant part in GDP. We shouldn't be shy of doing it in India. The third, the MSMEs, the micro, small and medium enterprises, is the answer to the large demographic dividend in our country. If we need to engage everybody, large industry will not be able to provide jobs. As I mentioned, large investment can take care of the exportables and compete with the best of the best in the world. But when it comes to numbers and employment, it is the MSMEs which will have to play a role. Now there is a startup culture, stand-up culture which has started by this government, which is very good. Mudra loans in a way is contributing to it. But what I am trying to say is the MSMEs are the future. And how do we encourage MSMEs? Look, in 1960s, when we did not have enough food, we started agriculture universities in every state. Right. Agriculture products are across the country. Each state had its own agriculture university to promote its agriculture product. Similarly, now we are self-sufficient in food. Agriculture universities are sitting idle and half of them are vacant because that thrust is no more required and is not there. Those universities can be now used to make MSME universities. In the country, 6,000 products are produced in MSME sector. There's no R&D for that. And we need to compete with the world. And therefore, MSMEs for every state should be encouraged state-specific. MSMEs should be identified, they should be encouraged, there should be R&D. To build entrepreneurs who will run the MSMEs, we need to have training courses which are taught in local languages, because the mind is not just restricted to Hindi and English speaking population. The sharp mind is there in different languages. If they are given the skills of labor laws, laws of management, accounting principles, and they are taught leadership and entrepreneurship and social environment, you will find we'll have entrepreneurs across the country just raring to go. So therefore there needs to be a hub and spoke model like the All India Institute at the apex of medicine and clinics in the remotest village. We need to have for the MSMEs an apex body which generates knowledge and information, translates into local language, and wherever there is an industrial cluster, MSME cluster, there are MSME clinics there, hand holding them. Mostly the banks don't lend to the MSMEs. MSMEs are also not registered. Banks don't lend to them because they say these guys change their address every now and then. They don't register because they're not sure what will happen. If they get registered, tax authorities can probably harm them and chase them. Once you start having the spoke and hub model of MSMEs, once you ensure respectability, once you have Indian Institute of Entrepreneurship running classes, you will have trainers, you will have people who want to take a plunge responsibly. The highest mortality rate in India is for the MSMEs. That's why people are scared of doing the job. I think that needs to change, and we need to, once we train people, we will find that the mortality rate will go down. The last point is, in case this mortality rate high, a young man has sunk money of the family, he's in trouble. But I think in the startup culture, especially at the lower end, we need to start thinking of a fallback mechanism for somebody who is investing and has failed. The incubators in the country, about 110 of them, can be given that responsibility to train young entrepreneurs, make them risk-taking, and in case they fail, the incubator can come in and provide some support to the failed entrepreneur. I have been at Stanford, as you mentioned, and at Stanford I've noticed one thing. When I asked the people, the angel investors, how do they identify a person to sink so much money? And they said, we look for a fire in the belly. And they said, is that all? Means every belly in India has a fire in it. Is that all? No, they said, in case he has failed once, that fire in the belly is far more genuine than one who is still dreaming and hasn't experimented. So I think in India, we need to start thinking of encouraging entrepreneurs, accepting failure and ensuring the ones which have failed, they are also handheld and they'll be the most successful in future.
You have traced the Indian history from agriculture. Now the primary sector, we have to concentrate on the secondary and tertiary sector. You talk of MSME, and those university and the research center, research hub has to be built up and set up, and lot of investment has to go. You indirectly talked about the industrial policy resolution, where the public sector used to occupy the commanding heights of the economy. Now this kind of situation is changing in a very significant way. Public sector is no longer required to occupy the commanding height. Now MSME is there. So what other steps can be taken to make our growth story more inclusive? Further suggestion besides what you have said?
Yes, I think post-COVID is giving us a great opportunity. COVID in a way was a challenge for the world. Many people suffered severely. The mortality rate in the rest of the world was far higher than India. But I'm sorry to mention, means I don't want to look so exploitive, but I think there are opportunities for India now. The opportunities for India is a reset button. The countries and the industries which made a beeline for China and made China as the industrial hub of the world are rethinking because of the supply side complications that came up. In economics, we talk of monopoly. China became the monopoly of the world as far as industrial production is concerned. I think that needs to change. Indian embassies, Indian economic counselors, Indian economic ministers in the embassies, they have to do strong hard work and tell the rest of the world that India is a far more responsible country. We have open virgin lands in Northeast, unutilized. We can just open it to the industrialists from across the world. About more than 1 lakh foreign companies which operate in China, they can be approached and brought into India. The beauty of bringing them to India is multifold. One is, within our own country, we will benefit from the technology that the Western world has. And that will modernize Indian industry in a very big way. Also, it opens floodgates to employment within our country. Secondly, the virgin lands of Northeast, which are totally unexplored, can be utilized. So I think the first thing we need to do is the reset button has to now play, and India should take it, that this monopoly power nowhere in the world should be prevalent. We should also be a part and participate in the economic growth of the planet. The other thing why I want that to happen is, over 5,000 years of Indian civilization, we have had a very socially responsible role that we have played. There has been no climate change. While we were the golden sparrow of the world, for 3,000 years we accounted for 30% of the world GDP. There was no climate change. So what is that growth model of India, which was called the golden sparrow, and people came from across the world chasing to look at its growth model? I think that model has to be shown to the world. That's a far more sober model. The model that India has was actually living and coexisting. And we respect water, air and earth. We give them the status of mother, father and guru. So we respect, we don't exploit them. And we also respect the flora and fauna. Many of the animals, we call them a mother or we call them gods. So the coexistence that we have practiced over 5,000 years ensured that there is no climate change or climate damage, that within 300s of industrial revolution, the whole world is on the brink of a difficult time. So that is the second thing the rest of the world will learn from us. In the meantime, our population, which is the young population, will get the benefits of employment. So therefore, I think going forward, we need to also say it and tell the world that during this period of 5,000 years of civilization, we must have also faced many ups and downs, many pandemics would have happened. What ensured that we survived? The thing that I think ensured survival was the Indian style of living. That is, lots of yogic exercises, lots of Ayurvedic medicines which are herbal, and in case need be some Unani. So the Indian medical system has ensured a healthy labor force for 5,000 years. We have various mantras of living on a steady base, on a sustainable long-term base. So there is a win-win for both. We need the modern industry and we have space, and it will beat the monopoly power. And the last thing I want to say is, given India's civilization and democratic values, the doors are always open both ways, incoming and outgoing. Unlike some of the countries, including China, where the borders are very tight and monitoring is very harsh. So I think India needs to take advantage of the post-COVID situation and pitch itself as a favored destination. We have a beautiful two stock exchanges, we have very good regulators, we have the financial system which is doing well, we have a population which is very open-minded, knows Sanskrit and also knows computer languages very easily. So I think we need to provide lead to the world. In this context, I must also mention, India is a very unique country in terms of its tolerant people. There are various religions which coexist here, various languages coexist here, various eating habits coexist here. So this tolerance and this patience that Indians have demonstrated is visible in the political system. Every year some state or the other is in a political situation and there's all sorts of things happen, but the country is steady. There's political stability across the country, and that is something which is very important. Whatever said, whatever be the party in power in the state or the center, whatever said, this political stability is an extremely important ingredient in investment decisions.
Thank you very much, Professor Charan Singh. You covered a lot of things on economics, both from the history of economic development to the current topics, and enlightened to our viewers. And this is a very, very enriching discussion. Thanks indeed.